Thank you so much. I'm the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa. But I mean, in terms of training, I'm a sociology professor. I've been invited by the European Union Commission to be part and parcel of the panel that will be presenting this afternoon on the question of access.
Mm-hmm. And there were some examples actually this morning's panel, right? From Delft University about how incorporating online learning increases the access to education. Is that something that you experience in your daily work?
By all means, but I mean, let me tell you that our challenges are different. We work in an environment where we have almost a third of the population, that is those who actually are studying with us, not necessarily having access, to technology as we would love to. But what we do then as a university is that we make investments on technology. We've decided to construct our own facilities in all the cities, particularly major cities in South Africa, for students to access those facilities where these gadgets actually are made available and so on. And we provide members of staff to train them. So in a way, that's how we've actually attended to the problem. But of course, those who come from middle-class family backgrounds are advantaged because they have their own tools, so it makes life very easy for them. So, but otherwise, that's the future of education. I don't think we can ever hope for anything else because it is highly unlikely that we can increase numbers on the one hand, but at the same time maintain the kinds of teachers or lecturers or professors that we used to have. Otherwise, in terms of the resources, it will certainly not be possible.
Yeah, so actually, how do you deal with, you have, I assume, an education system that's growing in a very fast pace, right? The numbers of student enrollment is very high, and suddenly a teacher, as a professor, would have to teach 20 students, has to deal with 2,000? How do you scale up very fast?
Well, what we've done, which is very interesting, is that much as in the past we relied heavily on getting, teaching assistants, who would be providing tutorials to our students and so on a face-to-face basis. We've recently introduced an e-tutoring system, so which actually affords fewer people to have access to a larger number of students. And it's not necessarily defined by any boundary because they can be anywhere. And then these e-tutors can be anywhere in the world as well. So in a sense, it has actually assisted us in a great way in bringing about a number of students to get that necessary support, which they couldn't get in the past.
Now, recently in the West, or in Europe and the US, there's been a huge hype around the idea of MOOCs. And one of the sort of statements that's made very frequently is that MOOCs allow a student anywhere in the world to benefit from the offerings of the best universities and so on, assuming that the best universities are around Boston or my interest is, are you actually feeling the effect of MOOCs in Africa, and in what ways?
In fact, it's interesting. We have not felt the impact of the MOOCs in South Africa, or in Africa for that matter. I guess it has to do largely with the fact that we are in the developing world. At this point in time, the interest of our own people is largely to qualify in order to move into particular professions and so on. And my own sense of MOOCs is that it is really available for those who are pursuing their studies for non-degree purposes. It's not necessarily geared towards
leisure learning.
Absolutely. So it becomes a challenge, for such students. But the availability of MOOCs, I actually need to add, is considerably advantageous to students because they can actually access reading materials of high quality anytime, anywhere, as and when they choose.
So they can use it to supplement their curricular studies. If there's a topic that they need to revise, they can use MOOCs.
Yes.
Do you see also potential for university staff to use not just MOOCs, but generally open educational resources and materials and courseware that's made freely available, instead of investing time in producing their own content and focusing more on the direct interaction with students?
By all means, I mean, I think that opportunity must actually be taken by everyone else who has an interest in education. We do, of course, from the side of South Africa, argue that it's important for us to develop materials that speak to our own conditions, that will actually, in a sense, show some affinity with the environment within which we operate, so that students cannot feel alienated by the educational materials. So that's mainly the reason why we are participating ourselves in developing our own MOOCs. We hope that by 2015, we should be having a few MOOCs out as a university. But beyond that, I must tell you that we have, in fact, been participating in open educational resources. Mm-hmm. We've got a number already that are readily available, because we do that with an understanding that within our own country and the continent, the need exists. So with the kind of approach that we use, we feel that people who need that kind of access can readily avail themselves of it.
So it seems, and correct me, that actually currently, at least, like I said, in Europe and the US, there's a model of sort of, we have the resources, we have the knowledge, and we'll send it over to Africa. What you're saying, no, we need to produce our own resources, we need to build our own content, our own practices, and if there's maybe room for synergy, it's more in collaboration on equal terms rather than a transmission model.
Absolutely. Collaboration is actually the way to go, because if we don't do that, unfortunately, we'll have a system that will not necessarily be beneficial to the world.
And have you spotted some opportunities for collaboration already here at the conference?
We're collaborating with a number of institutions, particularly those that are operating primarily online. Mm-hmm. So the relationships actually date back to some decades ago, because we are primarily a distance education university. Mm-hmm. So we've always had that kind of relationship, with partners who are operating in the same environment. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, going back to today's agenda, I wonder if you can kind of reflect back on the talks that you've heard so far. Maybe there were some points that particularly resonated with you and you found them, or surprised you, things that you kind of take away from the talks so far.
I must say, I'm really impressed with the way in which the European Union Commission has approached this subject. You see, because what I see happening here is that the continent has taken ownership, and then they are in the driving seat. Because I always argue that it is policy framework that will result in the kind of success that we desire, as higher education practitioners. If policy doesn't talk to what we do, of course we'll never succeed. So the reality is that they've become conscious of these challenges, and they're taking them head on. And I can tell you that I see Europe actually moving into a brighter future, because they will be in complete control. And of course, education that is going to be offered will be appropriate to the needs that the continent has actually identified.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a potential of something similar happening in Africa in terms of, policy, so maybe giving some direction, but also forming a dialogue with practitioners and industry and so on?
By all means. Within South Africa, we have already started. We fortunately are led by the Minister of Higher Education and Training, who himself has been in the same environment, as a professor. So it has helped in the sense of policy development, because he has brought together the same practitioners to reflect with policymakers on policy development. So in a way, we now have a policy that simply talks about moving away from that defined parameters between schooling generally and higher education, that simply talks about a post-school environment, that immediately talks about anything else that you can do beyond schooling, as operating under one umbrella, so that there can be a clear understanding about the content of the curriculum, vis-a-vis the requirements that are there, that we are supposed to be pursuing. Because generally, as universities, you will know, we've always operated, in isolation, because there's always been that assumption that we know what we are doing, so we're not worried about anyone else, So the policy has suddenly indicated that, well, look, that is not how things should be.
And perhaps to finish, I think a lot of people in Europe are interested in what's happening in Africa, want to get involved, want to contribute, some out of altruistic reasons, some out of commercial reasons. Africa is probably one of the regions in the world with the fastest growth at the moment,
yes.
So it's interesting from the business perspective as well.
Right.
What would be your advice for, say, if I want to get involved in education research and educational action in Africa? What would be your advice for me?
The advice is that if it's for altruistic reasons, by all means, we'll receive you with both hands. Well, that's what we need. The reality is that the number of students that we have to train, as you know, as a developing world, far outpaces any kind of resource that you can think about. So collaborations are going to make us succeed. Otherwise, without that, it will be very difficult for us to make any headway.